What's going on, everybody? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and surprisingly enough, I'm going to talk about a topic today that no one ever probably expected me to ever mention. And when I say ever, I mean ever talk about Fortnite. That's right, the game I have basically never mentioned. I think I might have mentioned it once in passing, but never made a specific video about it, never made a big deal about it, have no interest in playing it whatsoever. But when I saw this, I thought this was definitely worth a read, and then definitely worth a video. So, what happened anyway, and what's the deal here? Well, last night, I was looking at the front of one of the local newspapers. Now, I don't read the newspapers often, it's very, very rare I do, but there was something on the front page that caught my eye, and that was Special Investigation Fortnite, the £1 billion game destroying our families. Now, obviously, I live in Ireland, so this is a Euro deal here, but there's the actual interviews and whatnot, and the research and all that were conducted in the UK. Now, I'm someone who's very interested in the whole psychology of gaming. When you talk about addictive behavior and the whole perception of violence and video games cause violence and the lack of responsibility that parents put on their kids because they just perceive games as toys and something that a kid can play to occupy their time, I'm a very big opponent against these kind of things because there's usually factual evidence against it and it usually puts the parents in the wrong. But anyway, when I saw this, I actually decided, you know what, I'm going to read this article, and if this is decent, I'm going to make a video about it. So what is this article about anyway, other than the obvious Fortnite game destroying families and whatnot? Well, I read this, and in this, they actually go over a couple of case studies. There's one large main focus case study, as well as 3 smaller case studies as well. And there's a couple of lines in there too about what could potentially be done to combat stuff like this. Now, this video is going to be a while. It's going to be pretty long. Now, I'm going to read this whole article here anyway. I'm actually going to read the major case study as well as the 3 smaller ones and the quick potential solution as well. And then I'm going to talk about it. Excuse any rustling or anything you hear in the background, because yes, I'm actually reading a physical analog newspaper. I know, absolute madness in 2018. So, the tagline we have here, Fortnite addiction gripping parents too as shocking further cases are revealed. And then there's another big headline just underneath it that says, I took drugs to play 10 hours a night, my family fell apart, even my 6-year-old became obsessed with the game. Now, this is taken from the main article and the main case study, which we're going to get to right now. An addiction to the Fortnite game led to spiraling drug abuse for a man who was brought to the verge of losing his job, family and home. Dad of 2, Lee Harmer, told of his shame as he took cocaine to keep buzzing as he played through the night. By the day, he muddled through his work and was given frequent warnings. Aged 23, he would even rush home at lunchtime just to squeeze in extra game time. And he became so hooked, he was hardly troubled when his wife Sarah moved out with their children. Only when his 6-year-old girl got hooked too did reality give him a jolt. Lee said, not until I saw my own child obsessed with playing and watching others play did I realize I had to do something about my addiction. It made me an absent parent and set a dangerous example to a child far more vulnerable than I was. I have to say, Fortnite was completely addictive. I'd lose track of time in ways I've never had before. I'd go to bed at 11 PM, then creep down and play for 2 or 3 more hours. To wake me up, I started having a line of cocaine. I'd climb back into bed at 5 AM, absolutely wired, then pretend to sleep before crawling through the next day. It's amazing I didn't get sacked at work. I was almost unable to function. Finally, Sarah said she'd had enough and took the kids to her mum's, leaving me to hammer at the game, playing 10 or more hours a night. And that's where his quote on this part ends, so it goes back to the paper and what they have to say. Is last week we revealed how a girl of 9 is having intensive therapy after becoming so addicted to Fortnite she played through the night and would wet herself rather than take a toilet break. Many parents have spoken out on how their kids have become withdrawn, aggressive, depressed and struggling at school after playing for hours on end. Addiction therapist Steve Pope said last night, this is a £1 billion industry, but the cost of families wrapped up in gaming addiction is gravely high. We are coming close to a national crisis. As parents, it is our job to not only protect our children, but to set an example. But if a parent is in the grip of an addiction, it becomes almost impossible to shield their children, and it becomes very, very destructive. This game is designed to encourage obsessive behavior. which is something that can tear a family apart. Some people who can play these games without becoming addictive if they place strict time limits on playing time and frequency, but the nature of the game can make that difficult. And again, we go back to the paper here. Fortnite is a free-to-play shoot and survive game in which people compete in a battle royale and can buy extra features like weapons and outfits, is a huge hit. It made £200 million from in-app purchases in April alone, making its average revenue almost £94 million a month since it launched last year. Owner Epic Games stands to make £1.2 billion in its first year of release, but the downside is stark. One study shows the average family who plays it has 11 rows, that's arguments for you non-Europeans out there, 11 rows a month about the game. Lee, an assistant retail manager from Blackpool, started playing Fortnite last December. He said, "I've always enjoyed gaming, playing FIFA and Call of Duty since I was around 17, and I've never had problems controlling how much I played. Just before Christmas last year, some of the guys at work started talking about Fortnite. It was free, they said it was amazing, so I figured I'd give it a go. In the evenings I'd play for a couple of hours after helping Sarah put her 8-month-old daughter to bed. Sarah would tell me she was going to bed and I couldn't believe it was 11 PM already. She would read stories to our 6-year-old Mia in bed as I always had to finish my game. Soon it basically became Sarah's job, which was sad because I loved reading to my daughter." Lee ignored the warning signs of addiction and was starstruck as celebrities and sports stars endorsed and played the game. He said, "I'm a massive Manchester United fan and I remember seeing Jesse Lingard in the same game as me, which was a massive buzz. Everyone I knew at work, all my old mates from school and college, everyone seemed to be playing. It was all anyone ever seemed to talk about. I'd count down the minutes at work until 5:30 PM when I could rush home to play, almost pushing past Sarah to get to my Xbox." By February, worried Sarah told Lee he had to stop playing and get to bed, or risk losing his job as the family's sole earner, but he ignored her. Lee said, "I started rushing back from work during my lunch break to grab 30 or 40 minutes more playing time. But you can't leave games when you want, you're in a team, and several times I was late back to the shop where the other staff were waiting for me to open up. The manager gave me an official warning." His addiction to the game, which is rated 12 years and over, took a sinister turn when Lee realised his daughter was beginning to mirror his behaviour, watching others play the game and even dabbling in it herself. Children who are too young to play these games have tapped into the craze by e-sporting, watching others play in videos uploaded to YouTube or watching family members play. Again, this is the kind of thing where misinformation can hurt the general public. Addiction expert Steve said, "It isn't only playing that can be addictive, it's watching too. There's a huge craze online with professional players earning thousands from streaming videos of themselves playing." Lee went on to say, "I was so in my own bubble I didn't even notice Mia had also started playing Fortnite on her iPad. Sarah mentioned it and I said it was fine. There wasn't any really graphic blood or violence, but really I was justifying it so I wouldn't have to stop playing it myself." Sarah finally left, taking the kids to her mother's, and he ploughed himself into Fortnite. One day she called and said they needed to talk, and that was the turning point. Lee said, "By then I was consumed with guilt for what I had done. The money I was spending, how I'd let my family walk out without a fight. A couple of weeks ago Sarah and the girls moved back in. Mia seems much happier now, sleeping and eating properly. I just have to look at her and think how I almost ruined her life to remind myself how close I was to throwing everything away." Lee is now in counselling for his addiction and Fortnite is banned from the house. But many other parents and children remain at risk as the craze grips the nation. So that's the major case study taken care of when you look at that. Pretty grim stuff. Now, I am going to read these other ones as well. They're considerably smaller. They'll only take a minute each before I actually get in and talk about everything that we heard in this article. So the next small case study is "The threat against my child was chilling." A dad-to-be decided to quit Fortnite after an online fight ended in another player threatening his unborn child. Lee Morgan, 30 years old, suffered foul abuse and his opponent told him he hoped his children would get a horrific disease. He said, "It was really chilling and snapped me out of the game. It really upset me as he struck a nerve. I've got a kid on the way in October, it made me want to get out of that world." Lee said he will not let his son play the game and will quit it too, as parents should set a good example. He said, "I don't want him to remember me playing games all day." And he said of Fortnite, "It's addictive, like gambling. 10-year-olds are playing this and you can't gamble until a certain age. Current legislation doesn't go far enough." Personally, I think that part is absolutely fucking ridiculous because it's not the government's fault to step in because you can't control yourself or you're letting underage kids play things that they're not suitable for, which I'll cover later in this video. That's your fault. It has emerged that the user who abused Lee from Cannock West Mids is also accused of sending abusive messages to other players. Not sure how they'd know that, but still. So, next up, how they make their money. Gamers pay to make virtual customizations to their character in the game. It costs £7.99 to buy 1000 V-Bucks. Emotes, the game's trademark dances, cost between 200 and 800 V-Bucks. Battle passes, which unlock new levels in the game, cost 900 V-Bucks, while weapons, traps and gadgets cost between 200 and 1000. Fortnite owner Epic Games made £200 million from in-app purchases in April. Its average revenue is almost £94 million a month since it launched last year. And now we'll go on to the final one real quick, titled Son's 81 purchases over 3 days cost me £691. A dad was livid after his son was able to spend £691 buying accessories for Fortnite because he left his card details on his Xbox. Steve Harrison, 37 years old, says Tyler, who's 12, completed 81 transactions in 3 days. Despite the irregular activity on his NatWest account, that's a bank, he claims the bank could do nothing because he was deemed to have authorized the payments. Stephen from Stoke-on-Trent says NatWest should have flagged up the activity earlier, but admitted he forgot he had left his details on the unit after letting Tyler buy a birthday gift. He said, I just want to warn other parents to be careful. NatWest Bank said, we sympathise but we are not able to refund the disputed transactions because the card use was contrary to our terms and conditions. So there we have it, a couple of big case studies, well, some decent sized case studies at least, when it comes to Fortnite and the overall topic of gaming addiction and just addictive behaviour in general. Now, I am going to be the first person to say this, okay? This does not apply to Fortnite or whatever. I'm going to say this straight out. Gaming addiction, to an extent, does and doesn't exist. I'm going to elaborate on that right now. Do I believe that being addicted to games and gaming in general, just because of what they are, is possible and it's a thing? Absolutely not. I don't agree with that whatsoever. But what I do believe you can be addicted to in games is their reward systems and the experience they offer. There's multiple studies out there about how World of Warcraft employs reward mechanics to entice people to keep playing it over and over and over. So you play, you get your reward, you feel good. You want to do that again and again and again and again. Of course, there's other games that use it too. I'm just using World of Warcraft as the example. That's the pre-Fortnite Fortnite, if you will. World of Warcraft has been the subject of multiple different studies over stuff like this over the years. And as much as part of me wants to blame Lee from that first giant subject, I can't fully blame him, as someone who has actually been addicted to a video game before, Final Fantasy XI for those of you who are wondering. I basically threw my life into that game for years. I neglected my friends, my family, my real life, my job, everything, just for the sake of that game. I'm not sure what it was, it could have possibly been the whole reward mechanics as well, but I feel his pain and I can't blame him for that. But I also don't blame gaming for it. For things like this, there's a multitude of factors that can actually come about. Some people have addictive personalities. I wouldn't count myself in there. I think Final Fantasy at the time was more of an escape for me because of what was going on in my life. I won't get into those details, but that's just my opinion on it looking backwards. Hindsight being 20/20 and all that. But this guy obviously did take it to a new extreme. He was taking hardcore drugs just to fuel his gaming habit. Not the other way around, not to fuel an actual drug addiction, but he was falling back on hardcore drugs, potentially ruining his family because of that. That's a whole step above, if you ask me. Personally, I think his wife was right to walk out and to try actually snap them out of it. Luckily it worked, and he's getting back in order. Hopefully he can stay off Fortnite and hopefully his family sticks together. But you can try blame this on whatever you want. It just progresses. This is just the current form of it. First it was Tamagotchis, then Pokemon cards, then World of Warcraft, now Fortnite. Soon it'll be something else. It's just a current form of a bigger problem that has nothing to do with gaming itself being addictive, because gaming itself isn't addictive. But this all comes back to a topic I talked about a long time ago. And when I say a long time ago, I'm talking was probably one of my first few videos I ever made. So chances are anyone listening to this probably hasn't even seen it. Now I'm a lot more articulate and I can get my point across a lot better these days. But let's quickly move on to the next little case study that we looked at. And that was the one where the guy had threats made against his unborn child, basically. Now, realistically, I'm going to look at this two ways. One, online toxicity. Is it a thing? Yes, unfortunately. Should it be a thing? No. But this is the real world, and unfortunately stuff like this happens. People will talk shit to you in person, people will talk shit to you over voice on the internet, people will type shit to you any way, shape and form they can. And if a single little insult to him was that bad, motherfucker needs to grow some skin. Now, I'm not saying wishing some sort of disease on an unborn child is acceptable in any way, shape or form, but I just don't think this article should have made it in at all. And just for the last article as well, where the guy left his credit card info on the son's Xbox or PlayStation or whatever it was, and he made £691 worth of transactions. Again, something I mentioned way back in an old video, although this was a separate video. This could potentially be down to bad parenting. Now, of course, at the same time, it is completely possible he legitimately did forget. I usually consider things like this where, say, parents don't monitor their kids, their online activity, or what they're doing, or even things like their purchases and using parental controls. As much of a square as it makes me, and granted, I grew up not having all those types of restrictions, and look how the fuck I turned out. But that was a very different time. With how much time kids spend on all these different devices and platforms and whatever nowadays, these companies include these features for a reason. Parents choose to not use them. Most parents probably don't even know they exist. They'll buy a kid an Xbox, they'll buy a kid a PlayStation or whatever it is, hand them the box and say, here, go set it up. The parents won't read the manual, they won't know there's parental controls, they won't look around or set it up for them usually. And shit just goes wild from there. Now, of course, at the same time, I'm not saying just because he made this one or two little oversights that he deserves to have all this money taken away by his, well, we say taken away by his child. Because again, that's also not the case. What I do want to get out there as well is that everyone, please pay attention. It's that simple. The big problem we have here is parents still viewing games, gaming, consoles, PC, whatever, as toys for kids. This is absolutely 100% wrong. And I will say this, if a parent or guardian or whoever ever buys a child a game that they are not rated for example, buying a 12-year-old Grand Theft Auto, and then they complain when the content is not suitable, that is absolutely no one's fault. They do not have the right to be bitching at Rockstar. They do not have the right to be bitching at the shop that they bought it from. The fact is, the parent either did one of two things. Just bought the game and didn't care, or didn't bother looking into the actual details about what the game contains. And you know what that's called? Bad parenting. I'm going to give you an example. A few years ago, well, I say it was a few years ago, it was probably 5 or 6 at this point, I heard on the radio here in Ireland, some woman called in and complained that the game she had just bought her child featured a character putting a gun to their head and pulling the trigger. And this had positive benefits. It wasn't just suicide, because this game was Persona 3, a game I was familiar with at the time, and I'm obviously way more familiar with now. She was complaining that this glorified suicide, and that it shouldn't be featured in any type of game. Now, for those of you who don't know, here in Europe, Persona 3 is a game rated for 12-year-olds and above. This lady, who did no research and just bought the game because the child wanted it, her child was 8 years old, and she did not check any of the content in this game. Now, you may be wondering, how do I know she didn't check out any of the content in this game before buying it for her child, and that her child was 8 years old? Well, I was on the radio talking to her after I heard that, and I called her a bad parent. Because there's this stigma out there with games that still persists to this day, that they're just a toy, or that they're not important, or whatever it is. Games these days, coupled with the realistic graphics of many of them now, so their visuals, their sound, their convincing acting, these can all push very mature themes. Grand Theft Auto, The Witcher, Heavy Rain, Detroit Become Human, they can all have very mature issues. And these games are rated accordingly. Just like films are rated. I wonder, would this lady who bought a game rated for 12-year-olds and above, I wonder if she would have let her 8-year-old child go to see something like an 18s rated film in a cinema. That would be a mature rated film for you Americans out there. Mature is 17 plus if I remember right. Here it goes by straight numbers, and we have 18s plus. I can guarantee you she wouldn't have let them go in there because, well, what would you see in an 18s rated film? You'd probably see a lot of sex, you'd see a lot of cursing, probably some drug use, a fuckload of violence, explosions, gore, guns, probably even some gun to the head suicide. So there is a perfect example of bad parenting. Now going back to the articles that we looked at there a minute ago, because I know I do get really, really pissed off at the whole bad parenting / games are just a toy kind of thing, except when it backfires and they want to bitch at them for not doing their parenting. So I do kind of rant on that a little bit hard. But let's quickly touch on all three of these that we already covered at the start of the video from the newspaper. So the first guy who got into the game started using hardcore drugs, his family started falling apart and whatnot. Luckily, he managed to get out of the trap. I'm not saying he had an addictive personality. I know I personally don't, and I've been addicted to games before as well. I also don't think it's fair to just say gaming itself is addictive. It's some of the things that one or two specific games can offer. The level of fun, the level of inclusion, possible reward systems, whatever, but just gaming as itself I don't feel is addictive. The second guy with the insult, there's not really much to say. Grow some thick skin, and yes, unfortunately, toxicity on the internet does exist. We all wish it didn't, but unfortunately it does. There's not really anything we can do about it, but that's all. And the last guy with the whole payments thing with his son. This is a warning, basically. Whenever you get something for a child or whatever, they have safety and parental features for a reason. Use them. Do a couple of minutes of research before you're going to send your kid a game, before you're going to send your kid to a certain film. You don't let your kid drink alcohol until they're 18 or 21 or whatever it is in your region. You don't let them smoke for the same reason. Do you really give so little of a shit about your kid that you're going to send them off to do something else, be it a game, a film, whatever, without doing 2 minutes of research? You can Google almost anything in the world, and within 30 seconds, you can find out the content of that. If it's got drug use, violence, curse words, sex scenes, whatever. 30 seconds work. And guess what? If you don't do that, you're a bad parent. But no, it's just way, way easier to sit on your arse and not bother doing anything to take care of your kid, both physically or mentally or emotionally or whatever it is. It's just much easier to do whatever, just to shut them up, just to placate them, and then bitch about it later because you didn't do your obligation properly. As always, I am the logical Q, and people need to take responsibility and learn to say no.